English translation 717th contact. Part 1. Thursday, the 4th of April, 2019. 21:06 hours.
Ptaah, you come at an early hour today, dear friend. But be welcome and also greeted. It is actually fine with me, because I wrote something about how it all began with the center, and I also set out some things that will probably be of interest to the passive members, and should also be a thanks and obituary for Elsie. If I were to read the whole thing to you, it would take quite a bit of time because it's all 7 or 8 pages, so I guess you can take it from the computer and read it later if that is okay with you.
I also salute you, Edward, my friend. Naturally, I can and will transfer everything from the computer and then read it later at my leisure when I can deal with it undisturbed.
In memory, my last greeting for a dear human being, Elsie Moser, B. The 27th of March, 1927, D. 4th December 2018.
If I have a few words to say about Elsie Moser, I cannot help but connect the acquaintance and very friendly relationship between her and me with what happened in my life from the time I met Elsie in Regensdorf in 1943 until the time we met again 30 years later. And this happened according to a prediction of Svat in the 1940s, in which he explained that an ancient predestination would bring us together again after long years, in order to work together for many years for the building up of the mission, the worldwide spreading of the teaching of truth, teaching of the Spirit, teaching of life, and thus also for the concerns of FIGU, and to lead everything to success. I founded the association FIGU, Freie Interessengemeinschaft für Grenz- und Geisteswissenschaften universell in 1973 at Vihaldenstrasse 10, 8340 Hinwil, but it was not until the 16th of June 1978 that it was incorporated in 8488 Turbenthal. As a result of the current UFO concerns worldwide at that time, the FIGU Association was temporarily named and Ufology Studies, instead of the final name Universell, and has only been officially listed again with the correct original name Universell since 2018. But the fact that Elsie and I met again after 30 years required a special providence that came from Olgi Walter, because Elsie Moser only fundamentally found the way to the fulfillment of the predestination for the mission by Olgi drawing her attention to my activity and thus especially to the spiritual teachings and my contact with the Plejaren. My thanks are also due to Olgi Walter in particular. She was the main person in this respect, because she turned an important cog in the whole gear of the preliminary provisions, and only in this way made it possible that everything could come about in the way it was supposed to. And what Olgi as a FIGU core group member also took upon herself and did, when she made great efforts and fulfilled her duties, but also stood faithfully to the mission and to the FIGU, as is still her nature at her present advanced age of over 90 years, that requires special thanks. Dear and heartfelt thanks, Olgi. Billy.
Some things Olgi Walter can say about Elsie Moser, Zurich, the 16th of February, 2019.
Dear Billy, here at last is your requested report on Elsie, and what I knew of her. Elsie Moser, born the 27th of March 1927, died the 4th of December 2018. I met Elsie around 1970 in a Zurich schoolhouse in Zurich Seebach. She was a handicraft teacher. I was a music teacher. Sometime a little later, I discovered a small advertisement in Esoterra, the contents of which I no longer remember. I became interested and contacted my friend Margaret Flammer at the address given, and so we got in touch with Billy. This human being, Billy Edward Albert Meyer, or Billy Edward Albert Meyer, was so fascinating and great with his knowledge, his wisdom, and his contacts to extraterrestrials. We then formed a small group with like-minded people, were often allowed to accompany Billy to his contacts, and we heard a lot about Svath, Simyase, Ptaah, Quetzal, and others. Billy's family lived at that time in a small ancient farmhouse, a Krutz, in Hinwil in the Zurich Oberland. I told Elsie about these meetings in the interest group. Soon she joined us and had become an enthusiastic follower. I still remember exactly how she campaigned to find a bigger and better place for the Billy family to live. And when we decided to buy the Hinterschmidrüti, Elsie led the negotiations with the previous owner of the farmhouse, with I chauffeuring her each time. The continuation of the whole development is well known. I heard nothing more from Elsie for many years. Margaret has died in the meantime on the 15th of May, 1990. Between about 2000 and 2005, Elsie surprisingly answered the phone. I learned that she had found a home in France in a small house in the village of Romanay-la-Courtils. During all the next few years, our contact remained only by telephone and sporadically. She hardly ever talked about what had happened to her in the meantime. Now came the year 2017. Shortly before Christmas, a Vreni, her friend, called me. Elsie had suddenly fallen over in the presence of Vreni. So she came to the hospital there with a broken shoulder, and she was also in bad health otherwise. Around mid-January 2018, she was taken to Switzerland by her nephew without having been back to her house. She was then operated on in the Winterthur Hospital. The hospital in Bulak had no space available. As soon as she was feeling a little better, a home was found for her in Lucerne. It was the nursing home Linda in Grosswangen. From then on, our contact became more intensive, and according to her statements, she had been very lovingly cared for. However, her body must have been very frail, and she was also sad because she had been torn away from her beloved little house with all her belongings, etc., especially her books, which Eva always had to send her. So from then on, she lived in the Linde, slowly learned to walk again with the rollator, and her speech became visibly more understandable. But her head remained 100% fit all the time. Very often she spoke of Billy and asked me to tell Billy in her own words. Please tell him I want to thank him from the bottom of my heart for all he has done and is still doing for our earth and humanity. Thank you, thank you. That same day I called Billy with this heartfelt message. In the evening I then tried to call Elsie to inform her and also to give Billy's greetings. But she did not answer and did not pick up the phone. On the third day, her nephew took the call because he had been asked to go to the home because Elsie had suffered a brain hemorrhage. In the afternoon, it was the 4th of December, I inquired again with the home's management about Elsie's condition, but I was given the answer. She died this morning between 9 and 10 HRS. That was how her life ended. Since the time at Hinterschmidrüti, I have never seen Elsie in person again. According to her friend Vreni's description, she had become white-haired, walked slightly stooped, and was very frail. She also seemed very delicate. She must have been very much appreciated and liked in the Linde home. Dear Billy, I hope I have given you a small overview of what I knew about Elsie. Excuse me for my writing, because I almost only write with a magnifying glass. The macular degeneration accompanies my age, 93 years old. Kind regards, Olgi.
How it all began with Elsie Moser, and a few words about how the old farm Hinterschmidrüti became the SSSC.
It was in the summer of 1943 when I was able to spend a month's holiday with my Aunt Martha and my godfather, Alfred Godfather, who was a prison warden at Regensdorf Prison. One day I was loafing through the village and went under a portico to the right of the road. After a few meters I saw something moving on the ground, whereupon I looked to see what it was and realized that it was a young swallow that had obviously fallen out of its nest. Picking up the young and already quite feathered bird carefully with my hands, I looked around and saw a swallow's nest on a wall ledge on the ceiling of the portico, from which the young swallow had probably fallen out. So I tried to put it back into its nest and reached up. But unfortunately, I was too small with my 6 years, because the ceiling of the portico, and therefore also the swallow's nest, were too high for me to reach up and put the young swallow into the nest. Thinking for a moment, I stepped out into the street and looked around, hoping to see someone or an adult who could have helped me put the young bird back into its nest, but there was simply no one around to help me. But then I saw an older girl on a bicycle and called out to her that she should ride over because I needed her help. She did indeed answer my call, rode up to me, got off the bike, and asked what was wrong with me calling her, whereupon I explained the matter to her, and she quickly agreed to comply with my request. And so we went back together into the portico, where I showed the girl where the swallow's nest was placed under the portico ceiling, and gave her the young bird in her hands, which she took very carefully, reached up high, and was able to put it into the nest without any problem. For which I thanked her, of course, because I was very happy that together we were able to bring the little young swallow to safety. This was even more so because, as soon as the little swallow was back in the nest, a cat came sneaking through the portico and sniffing around on the ground because it was probably still aware of the smell of the young bird. And before I knew it, the girl shooed the feline away, who quickly disappeared out of the portico and onto the other side of the road. Thanking me another time for my loving help, the girl asked me who I was and what my name was, which I told her, of course, to which she replied that it was Elsie Moser. Then we talked for a while, and the girl went on to explain that she was not from Regensdorf, but came from Niederglatt, lived there, and was on a bike tour in the beautiful summer weather. So I said that I was also from another place, namely Bulak, and that I was on holiday in Regensdorf with my godfather and aunt. When we got into conversation like that, I told the girl what was happening inside me, namely that I liked her very much, and that it seemed to me as if we had known each other forever, and that we were somehow unusually connected. To which she replied that it was the same for her, and that everything was so strange. So it may have been half an hour that we talked and exchanged thoughts before we said goodbye. And when I listen to that short conversation, I can still hear her voice, as well as the words I said as a boy when we parted. We will see each other again, but I do not know when. Why I said that I did not know, but I felt something strange inside me that simply made me say those words, for which, however, Svath later gave me the explanation. After we had said goodbye to each other, we both went our separate ways again, after which, by a certain coincidence, we did not meet again in person until about 30 years later, and then I was also employed together for a long time for the purchase of Hinterschmidrüti, and for various works concerning the mission. In later years I went out into the world, worked and spent a decade and a half in various countries in Europe, North Africa, in various states in Arabia, as well as in Turkey, Afghanistan, Persia, India, Kashmir, and in Ceylon, which was renamed Sri Lanka on the 22nd of May, 1972, following a new constitution. As usual with Earthlings, the whole thing eventually led to armed conflicts and eventually to civil war, as Tamil separatists claimed the territory of Sri Lanka, and so from 1983 to 2009, there was an ongoing armed conflict in which the separatists, mainly the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam Elta, fought for independence from the island state of Sri Lanka. On the 23rd of July, 1983, the whole thing culminated in a civil war between the Sinhalese and the Tamils, after which the whole misery ended only after more than 25 years, on the 18th of May 2009, whereby, according to Ptaah data, the hostilities claimed more than 133,000 lives until the complete military victory of the Sri Lankan government troops over the rebels during the years from 1983 to 2009. Even in my time when I was in Ceylon, the population was 3/4 Sinhalese. Sinhalese means lion man, by the way. While the population of Tamils was about 15% of the total, with about 10% of the whole country's inhabitants being believers in Islam, referred to as Moors, with this data probably having remained about the same until today. Back in the 1960s, when I was still in the two Pakistan states, they were still divided into West Pakistan and East Pakistan, divided by India. Hence, West Pakistan was, as it still is today, west of India, while East Pakistan was located beyond India in the east. This division of Pakistan came about through the partition of the former British India as a result of religious and ethnic disputes, which ultimately led to the creation of the two independent states of Pakistan, East Pakistan and India, between the 14th and 15th of August 1947, whereby Pakistan consisted of two parts until 1971, namely West Pakistan, the actual present-day Pakistan, and East Pakistan, which is today called Bangladesh or Bangladesh, in German Free Bengal. The division of the former British India into two dominions, or into an administratively independent country of the British Empire and Commonwealth, as was laid down in writing in the Indian Independence Act of 1947, when the former British India was divided up, thus also putting an end to British colonial rule on the Indian subcontinent. The partition process was not peaceful, however, as the civil war-like state that broke out led to the deaths of around 1.1 million human beings. According to Ptaah figures, while 21 million human beings were deported, resettled, or displaced as a result of the partition of British India. In 1964, when I was traveling overland from Turkey on an assignment to Syria, Iraq, and Kuwait, I lost my left arm in a bus accident in Iskenderun, after which I went to Syria, Iraq, and Kuwait. Then I went back to Greece, where I married a Greek woman in 1965, but then moved with her again to India, where we settled in Ashoka Ashram, Gurgaon Road, Mehrauli, where I had lived and worked before, and was called Dr. Saab by various people. In 1967, we made our way back to Europe by land, and then my wife gave birth to our daughter, Gilgamesha, at Lady Dufferin Hospital, Makanahi Road, in Quetta, Balochistan, Pakistan, on the way home. Quetta is the capital of the province of Balochistan, in western Pakistan, and has a population of about 1 million, with several ethnic groups living in the city, but the largest being the Pashtuns, and as a result of the extensive ethnic diversity, several languages are also spoken in Quetta. When I finally returned to Switzerland in the summer of 1970, naturally with my wife and daughter, our son Atlantis Socrates was born in the hospital in Wetzikon in August, as the second and intended last offspring. In order to earn the necessary living back home, I first looked for a job where I had worked before as a machinist with the road builder Alfredo Piatti in Dietlikon. Then, after a year, I changed jobs and started working as a night watchman at the machine factory in Ruti, because I was underpaid for my hard work, which two men had done together before me. They told me personally that they each had a third more hourly pay than I did, namely far. 9. Each, while I was only paid for just for the work I did as a one-armed man, but which 2 healthy men had done before me, and were paid much better for it. But that was certainly not the way of Alfredo, whom I knew personally from my earlier work when I was employed by his foreman, Saghetti, as a machinist on the road construction site. So the injustice must have come from the office and new people, as a result of which I gave up my job and then worked as a night watchman and also as a night porter for the next few years. In 1972, I bought an older house on Oberdorfstrasse in Hinwil next to the local museum, where Jacobus helped me to enlarge the cellar. I then built a large aviary on the adjoining property, started breeding budgies, and sold my breeding parakeets throughout Switzerland. But because a new man was hired as night watchman at the Rüti machine factory, who proved to be quarrelsome and domineering and devised pathologically stupid night watch rules, I quit my job and from then on worked for Wache AG Zurich as a night watchman in Wallisellen, where I had to check large parts of industry, the local bank, the watchmaker and jewelry business, etc., and supervise them at night. After some time, I was offered a job as a night watchman and night porter closer to home at Zellweger AG in Uster, which also included the task of monitoring the fire alarm system of the Wegerenhof Foundation. I naturally changed my job and was now able to reach my workplace daily on my moped, instead of having to travel long distances by train to Zurich and back to Hinwil every day. The Certified Wegerenhof Foundation in Uster offers human beings with mental or consciousness-related and multiple impairments a permanent home in a multifaceted living space. https://www Wegerenhof h/ When our house in Oberdorfstrasse became too small in 1973 because of an unforeseen increase in the number of children, and because I had designed our house from the beginning for only 4 persons, that is to say, for the parents and 2 children, I sold the house to the municipality of Hinwil, which was very interested in it. They were very interested in us, my family and I. I was therefore kindly offered an old farmhouse at Vihaldenstrasse, 10 in Hinwil, temporarily and without rent, which was later demolished when it was empty again, and a retirement home was built on its site. I was also able to take my large aviary with me and continue to breed budgies, maintain it and even expand it to include some other and larger parakeet species, whereby I also had buyers for the offspring throughout Switzerland. During all this time, however, I was always looking for a new place to live, but the Hinterschmidrüti farm was always on my mind. It was located in the Tostal Valley on the mountain above Schmidrüti, and I had known it since I was a boy. Because my mother had been born in the neighboring village of Egetsville, and I had therefore often been with her in the area. Even when I was working as a night watchman at the Rüti machine factory, a few articles about me appeared in the newspaper Blick, one about my stays abroad, another about my night watch duties in Wallisellen. Another was about the fact that I also spent my free time helping people to regain their zest for life through psychological help. Inevitably, this was also connected with the teaching of the Spirit, which quickly got around, as a result of which more and more people contacted me who were interested in this. So it came about that I set up a large room in the farmhouse for this purpose, in order to hold conversations with the emerging interest group in the sense of the spiritual teachings, whereby a man named Hans Jacob also stood out and placed an advertisement in an esoteric magazine, which had the consequence that more and more persons contacted me, and a loose group quickly formed from this, which I called Free Interest Group, from which the name FIGU then also arose in the end. The advertisement in H. Jacobs' esoteric magazine Esoterra was also read by Olgi Walder, which meant that she was interested and came to Hinwil and to V. Haldenstrasse 10 with her friend Margaret. Flammer, as later also with some other women she knew who were also interested in spiritual teachings, and my contact with the Plejaren, and we then all got to know each other well. Together with them, and Bernadette Brand also joined us. The permanent group Freie Interessengemeinschaft für Grenz- und Geisteswissenschaften, Universell, Free Interest Group for Frontier and Spiritual Sciences, Universal, was formed, which we officially called Freie Interessengemeinschaft für Grenz- und Geisteswissenschaften und Ufologiestudien, Free Interest Group for Frontier and Spiritual Sciences and Ufology Studies, which, according to the Plejaren, was how it should be at that time, purely for a purpose due to the UFO hype. But since this hype had passed in the meantime, the original name FIGU was brought back into use with the correct designation, namely Freie Interessengemeinschaft Universell. Well, when Olgi Walder and her acquaintances appeared at my house at V. Haldenstrasse 10, there was the almost fabulous surprise and coincidence that one day the girl who had been helpful to me in Regensdorf in 1943, Elsie Moser, was also standing in the flesh at my front door, simply 30 years older. And as it happened to me then with the inner stirrings of familiarity, so it happened again now, not only with me, but also with Elsie, as she told me later, and also spoke of how she had felt strange all the time since we had met in Regensdorf. She had never been able to forget our meeting and conversation back then, but very often the events of that time had passed through her mind, and from time to time it had also appeared in her dreams and had triggered in her the desire to renew and continue our early acquaintance. Well, Elsie had come here because Olgi had drawn her attention to me, and somehow, as she told me later, she felt connected by an inner urge with the man and what surrounded him concerning spiritual teachings and UFOs. After Olgi had told her some things, the main reason, Elsie told me, was that the strange feelings of connection had intensified in her, which she had not lost since our meeting in Regensdorf in 1943, which is why she could not avoid coming to me in Hinwil after Olgi's explanations. So after 30 years, by a coincidence in which Olgi played a very important role, the circle of acquaintance between Elsie and me had closed again, because it had to be that way, as I had learned from Schwath in the later 1940s. And it was Elsie who then, as it is so easily said, proved to be a tireless good soul for many necessary matters regarding the mission and the purchase of Hinterschmidrüti, for which not enough thanks can be given to her and must also be expressed posthumously. Of course, all the members of the newly formed small and solid group of the Freie Interessengemeinschaft soon knew about the problem of my search for a flat, and when a Mrs. H. told me, who owed me over 23,000, when Mrs. but that a town council was already interested and that they were negotiating with them about selling it. All my bells rang, and we immediately drove to Hinterschmidrüti as a whole interest group, looked at the dilapidated farm and decided to buy it. So I negotiated with Mrs. Ours that I would waive the entire debt if she sold the farm to us instead of the town of, to which she agreed. I then informed Elsie Moser about this, whereupon she took the matter into her hands and conducted the negotiations for the purchase of the farm. She also called in a broker to buy the farm on behalf of our small group in her own personal name, because our FIGU group was not yet a legal person or a registered association and therefore not yet entitled to do official business. I therefore gave her all the rights, so that she could also clarify and settle everything with the banks, which she also tried very hard to do, but the broker was not much help to her, because he was not very committed to it either. In the course of time, he joined our group pro forma, although we only recognized the pro forma later, in order to get hold of the spiritual teachings, which he then made use of by rewriting them and changing them to suit his purpose. He also worked as a psychological counselor for psychologically damaged persons, very often asking me for advice on how he should behave towards those seeking advice, how he should treat them, and what he should say to them in an advisory capacity, because in truth he knew nothing at all about psychological counseling. He did not let this show, however, because he never talked about it at the center and asked me to come to Dusnang for the counseling conversations, where I always explained to him in the restaurant Brook and Wage everything he needed to know to be able to explain his counseling conversations to his clients, whereby he always noted down verbatim everything I taught him and explained to him, so that he only had to learn everything by heart and could pass it on verbally, but then also worked everything out in writing. After some time, it then became loud in the center that Engelbert and 2 other group members each secretly went to Rusikan and joined this broker in a group he had set up there, where he completely falsified the spiritual teaching I had worked out and given him to study and passed it on to his followers. This went on until Engelbert was finally plagued by a bad conscience and once told that he had joined the brokers group in Rusikan with 2 others and learned his, or rather his, spiritual teaching, which in various parts of the teaching was so much like the one I had compiled and given him to study. This seemed suspicious to Engelbert, which is why he asked me for advice, whereupon I suggested that he should check the whole thing in detail and find out what was really going on. A short time later he observed in Rusikan, in the house of the broker, how he rewrote, changed, and falsified the spiritual teaching letters I had given him for study. Consequently, Engelbert uncovered the swindle, after which the broker disappeared from Rusikan shortly afterwards, and also the members attached to him found their way back to the spiritual teaching I had created. And as it then turned out, the broker in the meantime deceased, but his school of spiritual doctrine seems to continue to exist, took the spiritual doctrine in his possession, which I had handed over to him for personal study, and falsified more and more of it. This, in order to finally open a school for frontier and spiritual sciences somewhere in Lucerne with all the falsified material, and to spread his spiritual teachings through it, which he thoroughly rewrote and falsified from my spiritual teachings and those made available to him for learning, whereby he unlawfully secured and procured for himself an extremely profitable and lucrative income. When it came to finalizing the purchase of the farm, Mrs. H. grumbled and told me that the whole thing was not possible because she had many other debts than just the one to me, which is why she needed much more money because various creditors were on her back. And that was some time later, after my family and Jacobus had already moved into the courtyard. Then one Sunday, when she appeared in Hinterschmidrüti because she wanted some black money under the table, after we had collected more than 160,000 francs in our group and had already paid her for the farm, she told us that the farm could not be sold because neither she nor her husband could decide on it, but only the guardianship authority of because her husband was a guardian. Of course I could not, and was not allowed to agree to her request. So after I had not come to an agreement with her on Sunday, I went to the debt collection office in Turbenthal on Monday and asked what the actual background of the whole thing was, which Mrs. And what the debt enforcement officer told me was extremely unpleasant, because he explained that on the following Saturday in the officially ordered bankruptcy proceedings and the auction of the Hinterschmidrüti farm would take place, and we would lose all the money from the down payments we had made. This made me furious, and I immediately did everything possible, with Jacobus driving me from place to place in his old VW Beetle, to be able to save everything without informing Elsie, and thus without her permission, because she had already started to arrange the necessities with the banks. So I simply went to the banks and arranged everything contractually that could be arranged by me. Interestingly enough, I had no problems at all, neither at the one bank nor at the other, because at both banks involved in the matter everything was simply done, and what I ordered and had to be done was done. Then Jacobus drove me to where I went to see the president of the municipality, who was also the guardian of Mr. Ours and responsible for the Hinterschmidrüti farm going under the hammer. I also summoned the person in charge of the guardianship authority and found out that the farm was to be put under the hammer because horrendous debts had to be paid, which Mrs. many of which had died again due to incorrect keeping, etc. I was also told that the farm was to be sold. Furthermore, it was explained to me her large farm and all the land had already been sold 5 years earlier for 4.5 million francs, but the entire proceeds had been senselessly squandered in less than 4 years, both by the children and by Mrs. herself, who on the one hand bought expensive sports cars for her offspring, but on the other hand, like herself, by building several giant aviaries and buying expensive scimitars such as hyacinth macaws, which at that time cost around 30,000 francs per macaw, and of which Mrs. H. owned 2 pairs, drove the expenses from the sale of the house and land to immense heights until there was no more money left. Today, these scimitars still cost around 15,000 francs each. So of the 4.5 million francs that the entire large farm had brought in, after a short time there was nothing left except for the Hinterschmidrüti farm, which Mr. Herr's guardian had bought for him as a small cash security, but which was now to be auctioned off. In addition, the house in which the H family still lived, because this had been ordered by the guardianship authorities, was so demolished inside that everything looked like a war scene. All these circumstances led to the fact that Mr. H had been made a guardian, and now the Hinterschmidrüti farm was also to be auctioned off, but now had to be compulsorily put up for auction in order to pay off the horrendous debts of the H family. Well, after hours of negotiation with the community president and the guardianship man, who were absolutely not enthusiastic about me, but effectively furious when they heard what I had to say and what I wanted, their furious expressions finally smoothed out. However, this only happened when I explained to them that if they would arrange everything at the notary's office for the FIGU notarial sale or written change of ownership. I would then put the remaining amount of 64,000 francs on the table at the notary's office on Friday, the 28th of April, 1978, which still had to be paid for various officially determined purposes. Fortunately, I was still able to raise this amount from my private reserve and thus solve the problem. So the president of the municipality and the guardian promised that they would take care of everything at the notary's office and arrange for Mrs. H to appear at the notary's office on the day before the bankruptcy proceedings. That is to say, on Friday, to sign over Hinterschmidrüti, precisely as an authorized representative for her guardian husband. With these assurances, I was able to go home on Thursday evening, the 27th of April, and inform Elsie that the next day, Friday, the 28th of April, 1978, could be transferred, which also went off without a hitch, after which Elsie was able to sign the purchase contract. The amount of 64,000 francs, which I had brought with me and put on the table and which Mrs. was immediately grabbed by the notary, and he said something like, "The authorities will collect it," which Mrs. years later, after the FIGU had been established with statutes as an association in the sense of art, 60 FF, ZGB, and therefore as a legal person, and Elsie and I together were also able to settle all the financial problems in the meantime. We were able to notarially transfer the farm to the FIGU. This happened on the 17th of April, 1985, after Elsie Moser, as treasurer and bookkeeper at the time, had been instructed in 1978, in accordance with a unanimous core group decision, to buy the Hinterschmidrüti farm in her own name for the FIGU, in order to then later sign it over to the FIGU in accordance with the purchase, which also happened on the 17th of April, 1985, whereby in the meantime the Hinterschmidrüti farm had been largely renovated and converted into the Simyase Silver Star Center. Unfortunately, Elsie Moser did not remain in the core group and also did not live regularly in the center, but then went other ways because she wanted to settle in France, which she already talked about back in 1943 when I met her in Regensdorf. So it actually turned out that way, and she bought a small house somewhere near the village of Romane-la-Courtille, where she lived until she was very old and only let Olgi hear from her sporadically and by telephone. However, she never forgot the Simyase Silver Star Center, because she kept in touch with FIGU by constantly receiving my new books and FIGU publications. In 1985, shortly after the transfer of the center to the association, Quetzal ordered, according to necessity, that a new regulation was necessary, following which, according to his instructions, I had to take over and learn the administration of the FIGU Center, and with it also everything connected with the center construction and with the official regulations and specifications, etc. This was also connected with all the various tasks, including the necessary correct management and handling of the finances, and the management of the association and the whole operation, etc. This was a challenge for me. I was thus confronted with a challenge and task of which I had no idea, no knowledge, let alone experience. Of course, I was able to handle money and manage it correctly from a young age, because as a juvenile I had to earn my pocket money through my own initiative, such as by collecting waste glass in the rubbish pits, which I could deliver to the Bulak glassworks for 5 centimes per kilo. I also collected scrap metal in the pits and everywhere else, which I could sell to scrap metal dealers, just as I collected berries in the forest, and sold them to housewives who made jam from them at that time. I also collected pine cones in the woods, which brought me good pocket money because I could sell them in the restaurant Wage, where they were used for the fire. I also learned later how to deal with the pay system when I did sewerage work for the cities of Zurich and Oerlikon on my own initiative with my own piecework groups, etc. In my lifetime, I had never had anything to do with the administration, construction and finance of the future Simyase Silver Star Center, nor with the management of an association and a large company. So Quetzal's invitation left me like the proverbial donkey in front of the well-known mountain that had to be climbed. But I had no choice but to make an effort, to dare the climb and learn the whole thing, which was, however, extremely extensive, and the time was also limited because Quetzal explained that I would not have more than 3 months to do so, because things would soon arise that I would then have to deal with. So I began to study, in addition to all my other necessary work, which was very manual, as well as office work and writing articles, books and writings, etc. And it soon became clear that the whole thing was indeed unavoidable, that the swatting was worthwhile, and that the mission work and also the material values of the FIGU Center were increasingly improving. But, and this must be mentioned in particular, all the members of the core group and all those passive members who financially supported our FIGU association and thus the mission also made a tremendous contribution, as did all the various manual work in the center, especially Bernadette and Ava, who also did the typing work. Engelbert did all the printing work, while other core group members did the correction work of the writings and books, etc., etc. The fact is, above all, that without all the work done in every way by each individual, as well as the financial loan assistance provided, which of course had to be repaid, it would never have been possible to achieve what has happily resulted in all the great values. For this I thank all the loyal participants who had worked from the beginning and from the ground up to build the whole, as my thanks also go to all those who ultimately went other ways than that of the FIGU, or to whom I can only express my venerable thanks posthumously. I would also like to express my sincere thanks to all those who are still and will continue to be involved in the mission and FIGU as FIGU core group members or passive group members, as FIGU benefactors, or as other FIGU friends, who have all contributed to the Simyase Silver Star Center and the emergence, spreading, and preservation of the mission. Simyase Silver Star Center, the 18th of March 2019, 2203 HRS. Billy.
Anyway, today I have some things to say that are unpleasant. Because in checking the conversation reports that you retrieve and record in the computer over a long period of time each time after our conversation, it has come to light that in the 669th conversation report of the 1st of January 2017 regarding the predictions of my father Shvath, they are unfortunately extremely incomplete. I am aware that this does not correspond to any inattention or fault on your part, for I know of your correctness and diligence in all matters with which you are concerned. And since we are also aware that the sectarian energies and forces acting on all your work maliciously cause disturbances and also delete or falsify texts that have already been written down, as I personally have also witnessed several times, as have Florina and Anjana, as well as several core group members themselves, the matter is also clear to me. All this prompts me also in the future to thoroughly check all the reports of the conversations you have called up and written down according to our own records. In many cases, I had to notice during the review and control of earlier discussion reports that certain parts of various reports retrieved and written down by you have been missing for years and are therefore not complete. Fortunately, if I want to use your expression that you sometimes use, it is to be said that there are only very few maliciously, regrettably inserted falsifications, which on the other hand are not of great importance, and therefore probably do not need to be corrected. This is in contrast to what has been happening in recent times, since foreign writings, insults, distortions of words, concepts and facts, as well as threats against your life, foreign and false as well as misleading additions are maliciously inserted into your transcripts, and also conversational texts that have already been retrieved and written down simply disappear without a trace, so that you have to retrieve and write them down again, not infrequently even 2 or 3 times. But what you have written now, I will take from your computer, and furthermore, since we have mentioned the whole thing, you can connect it here to my words, so that it can then also be read later by all interested persons.
Good. Then I will do that. But now again, what is with the 669th contact report in your father Svath's predictions?
I need some time to do that now because I have everything here that I have recorded that you now need to see of my father's prediction from 1947, and that is quite a lot. As I saw for myself in January 2017, you had retrieved and written down the entire conversation report. After which, however, it was apparently affected and largely altered and much deleted shortly afterwards by the pernicious sectarian energetic influences and disturbances. Consequently, you then produced the written expression and distributed it to the core group members without noticing that the predictions had been manipulated sectarian energy-wise and no longer corresponded to what I had presented to you from my father's annals, and you had then also retrieved it and written it down, as I have seen for myself. For this reason, it is necessary that I present everything to you once again, that you review my record and then call up the whole thing another time and put it down in writing, but in a special way, in order to be able to control the renewed written record down to the last detail before you pass it on again. In this matter, our Sonair are also trying to find and work out a defense against the attacks against you and your work, in order to ward off the evil attacks in the future, but this will be difficult, as has been explained to me. Nevertheless, they have already found a way, which now has to be tested to ensure that you can retrieve the reports of conversations and the information I have passed on regarding my father's annals.
Of course I will do what you say, but it will also be necessary, at least for the readers of the contact report outside the core group, to explain what it is about sectarian energetic forces that very often interfere with and even destroy my work. It will be difficult to explain this, however, because the whole thing will seem so crazy to the readership that it will probably be regarded as a fib at the very least, or at worst as a confusion of consciousness and a going mad, etc. on my part. Besides, it is also possible that the 669th contact report has already been published in Volume 15, which would not be very pleasant. I will have to ask Bernadette about that, though, because she produces the blocks. Nevertheless, I think it is good that you check the contact reports from time to time, because this is the only way to recognize such perfidies, which are caused by these sectarian energetic swinging waves, of whose existence and work not even the best earthly scientists have a clue.
This will continue for a long time, but we should now deal with the vexed matter with which I want to begin here, and for which your attention is required. What we have to discuss is not to be recalled by you later and not to be written down, but only again the complete predictions of my father Svath.
If it is good with you, could you arrange everything for me in such a way that when I call up the conversation report, everything is characterized in such a way that I can recognize all the passages that have fallen out and have been re-added, etc., and mark them in the computer with a color, preferably red?
Your idea is gripping, consequently I will do as you suggest so that Zafanat Panich can take up your idea. Now, however, we should begin the work, for it will take some time and moreover your attention.